Welcome this evening. As we were sitting in a meeting last week before, we noticed or figured out by virtue of when she was going to release the paper ballots, which is basically the first week in May, that there's no way that we were going to have a meeting for any of our candidates to be able to talk to prior to the election. So we're trying this to see how this works. As Scott said, we're going to record it and post it on the Facebook. Hopefully it turns out okay. I don't know. I mean, this is new grounds for all of us here. So we've never really sat down for this long, for 40 minutes. Well, maybe 40 minutes. I don't know. That's what we kind of planned for, to go through in this kind of detail and ask some questions to everybody. I will say for the District 40 seat, that's probably the most interesting one that we have here in Carson City. It was kind of the expectation Al was going to run, and he didn't. So we have PK's running, and Dave Williams is running, kind of dropped in at the last minute. As you know, it was just sudden. Okay, here they are. And no one really said anything for a while. Then all of a sudden it's like, ooh, we better do something here. We got a primary coming up. And to be honest, that's probably the most close contested primary that we're going to have. As everybody knows, PK was in this office before. He got in a little bit of trouble over the margins tax. He got thrown out of the Central Committee. I'll let him talk to that tonight. I will say, I'll do my short intro. This is PK O'Neill. He's here in town. He has a webpage, pkoneil4nevada.com, and I'm going to let him talk for a couple minutes about what he is and what he's going to do for us. PK, where you at?
I want to thank Paul and Scott and the Carson City Republican Party really for sponsoring tonight's meeting of the candidates. You gave a great introduction. It's in a very short time frame that we're doing this unusual type of campaigning. It's impressive on how you were able to draw it all together during these unusual and unfortunate times in such a short time frame. For those that don't know me, I'm PK O'Neill. I'm a candidate for the Republican nomination for Assembly District 40. I'm running because several community leaders approached me, including the incumbent Al Kramer, when he decided to withdraw from politics due to family health concerns. They all asked me to step forward and run for the assembly, basically on the last day almost, if not the last hour, it seemed. I previously served as assemblyman in the 2015 legislative session. I worked on the judiciary, the transportation, and the labor and commerce committees. I sponsored 5 bills. All 5 bills were passed by the legislature and were signed by the governor, which was a first for a freshman legislator. In these challenging times, having experience in the legislature is a plus. I retired as a division chief with the Nevada Department of Public Safety, and since then have worked as a consultant with the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I now serve as a commissioner on the Nevada Commission on Ethics. I'm also on the Board of Trustees of the Carson Tahoe Health System, and am chairman of the Salvation Army of Carson City and Douglas County's Advisory Board. I am running as a Republican because I embrace the traditional Republican values of a limited role of government, a physical responsibility, self-responsibility, and a belief in the free enterprise system. I'm actually proud to be a Republican, and I wonder about my primary opponent since he doesn't use the word Republican on any of his yard signs or even acknowledge that he is a Republican on his website. I am proud of the many past and present Republican office holders who have endorsed me. The Nevada Assembly Republican Caucus, 2 lieutenant governors, Assemblyman Jim Wheeler and John Ellison, Shelley Aldean, former Carson City supervisor, along with numerous other business and civic leaders from our community. I want to thank you again for this opportunity to introduce myself and answer your questions.
PK, I love you like a brother, but can you just do a little quick 30 seconds on the margins tax so we can get that out of the way and move on with life.
Well, first of all, the margins tax was a ballot question, and that was defeated. And I strongly supported the defeat of that because it was flawed. It was a horrible tax that was going to occur. It gave a $1 million limit, and as soon as you did business of $1 million or more, it fell down to you were taxed, I think, at 2 or 3% on your first dollar. And it was horrible. Within the legislature, the governor presented a modified commerce tax. And I'll say in hindsight, because that's probably always the best, you always win the football game on Monday morning or Tuesday morning, depending on when the game was played. Maybe I erred in my ways after seeing what the Democrats have done to that tax and taking it out of its category spending where it had accountability. You had to write like a grant. You had to be subject to audit, and there was strong accountability to it. They've destroyed that part, taking money and putting it into the DSA. So we had hoped at the time, naturally, to keep the Republican majority and move forward on that. Even in the last legislature, they reneged on promises made in 2015, which is part of that lawsuit that is now being discussed in Carson City here. I think it's District 1. So, as I said, it may have been an error on my ways, but you've got to deal with the information that's given to you at the time. And with that, and I said while I was campaigning, and I'll say it again today, I've always had to make difficult decisions in my profession. Just probably as you faced also, Paul, in the Air Force. Some people didn't like your decisions, but you knew you got to deal with the information you have, and that's it. Sometimes you were right, hopefully more than not, and sometimes you proved to be wrong. And in this case, I may have erred on that.
Okay. We're going to go into the questions now, and just to kind of explain to everybody, I emailed everybody their questions ahead of time. I mean, this isn't, you know what I mean, Donald Trump sitting up on the stage speaking for an hour and a half effortlessly. You know, we're all pretty normal people here. And it's more of a struggle when you surprise people with. I see Lori Bagwell smiling because it's hard, you know what I mean, to sit up there and talk, and especially when you're throwing a question, trying to think of what to say. So that's kind of why we went ahead and emailed them ahead of time so they can gather their thoughts and speak coherently. With the lopsided numbers currently in the legislature, obviously the Dems are in charge. How are you going to work against the liberal agenda to ensure Nevada doesn't even become more of a Democratic stronghold?
Well, first, allow me to say that the Republicans statewide are working diligently to improve the lopsided numbers to prevent that from happening. The Republican Assembly Caucus, which has endorsed me, believes that in the 2021 legislative session, we'll have a minimum of 15 Republican seats. We're going to work strong to pick up 2 more seats, which will take us out of the super minority. With that, we can actually have some bearing on what legislation is considered, particularly in regard to any tax or fee increases. As I said prior, don't forget that there is still an argument in the courts regarding the Democrat passing taxes in the last session without the mandatory 2/3 vote. Most likely, that issue will come back into play. As I said, I may have erred in my 2015 vote for tax diversification, particularly in seeing what the Democrats have done. I can assure you that with the current state of affairs, with the COVID-19 lockdown of our state, the highest unemployment numbers in the history of the state, and with no plan for recovery from the governor except a plan, to discuss a plan, to think about a plan, any and all increases to me are impossible. You can't tax what isn't there. And all businesses, small or large, have lost revenue. They will be fighting to survive and regain their position in the economy. We must work to keep Nevada's pro-business climate alive and healthy.
There's a movement petition out there. We've been kind of hearing about this the last couple of months to change Nevada's closed primary system to California-style open primary. What are your thoughts on that?
In short, I don't want it. I don't like it. I don't want it. Forget it. And two reasons. One, it's California, and two, the open primary. But to be more professional in my reply to you, there's a reason that some people choose to register as Republicans, and some other people select to be Democrats, Green Party, IEP, or unaffiliated. I chose to be a Republican 47 years ago, as I believe in the basic ethos of limited government, fiscal responsibility, free enterprise, and self-responsibility. I believe that those of similar mind should select their party's representative for a partisan election. The merits of an open primary are debatable, with the main reason given as an increased voter participation from the nonpartisan or independent voters in both primary and general elections. Unfortunately, that doesn't always carry out. Using Hawaii as an example, their primary voter turnout fell from a high of 75% in 1978 to 42% in 2006 after changing to an open primary. California had a modified closed primary from 2001 to 2011, where each party could decide to allow an unaffiliated voter to partake in their party's election process. In 2011, they went to a modified open primary, also called a jungle primary, which should give you a hint, where registered voters may vote for any candidate. The top two candidates, regardless of a party, then go on to the general election. It might sound good on face value, but let me say that California has not had a Republican U.S. Senator since 1992. Their state legislature has been, for several years, solid Democrat. They currently have a supermajority in both houses. Even Arizona, which has been a hard red state, is turning to somewhat of a bluish color with its open primary system. The debate might go on, but I have yet to see a valid reason to go to an open primary election. California's system is not where Nevada wants to go. Our current primary system has worked just fine, and I believe we should stay with it.
As we're trudging ahead, we're talking about the legislative session coming up. I mean, it's like it's screaming up on us pretty fast here. What is the biggest challenge for our Republican caucus toward the next legislative session, and what will your priorities be?
Well, I think the first thing is reestablishing itself as a respected member of the legislature, and that's going to be accomplished by the minimum gaining of 2 more seats. Without that, the Republican caucus is in serious jeopardy of losing any relevancy. We must nominate candidates who will be elected no matter what. We are still the party of Reagan, and I remind you of one of his sayings, quoting, "The person who agrees with you 80% of the time is a friend and an ally, not a 20% traitor." Once in the legislature, we need to address the COVID-19 pandemic and the horrendous effects it has had on our state. The consequences have been overwhelming at numerous levels. Business closures, unemployment, physical and mental health, the increased demands on public and private social services, along with medical providers, are near the breaking point. Leadership demands the knowledge, understanding, and involvement to address these challenges in a holistic manner. My knowledge gained from working with our local hospital and its medical providers will greatly assist in creating appropriate policy, not only to deal with the recovery, but to look at ways to lessen any future similar attacks on our society. I must say, it is fair to say the coronavirus is not going away anytime soon. Education, including job preparation, not just for the present work environment, but for future technologies, has to be addressed. This includes strengthening both our 4- and 2-year college programs to ensure their affordability and accessibility. Additionally, at the lower level, we must advocate for education choice. Traditional K through 12 education shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all. We should allow students to learn through the model which fits them best. Supporting education supports the future of our state. Lastly, the next legislature session will also be addressing reapportionment. I will fight tirelessly and endlessly to ensure that the Assembly District 40 continues to include all of Carson City and not be divided up into other districts as has happened in the past.
And what are your priorities going to be? You know how you talk about normally freshman assemblymen get the five bills that you get to pass. Have you thought any thought of those yet, or get to introduce?
I've actually thought about trying to put some limitations. I was speaking with a CPA in town, putting some limitations and trying to correct some of the mistakes we may have made in the commerce tax, and putting it tied to the state's growth and limiting it there, and also to make sure that it's protected from any lowering. I'm also looking at some education bills to support for the community colleges on their job training programs to ensure that they have proper funding from the legislature. And funding is going to be very difficult, period, but I want to make sure that they're protected so they can maintain those job training programs. There's also a couple discussions that I've had with people on some of this early release of prisoners has got to be addressed. It's absolutely ridiculous to allow people to get away. They get sentenced, but the sentence isn't what they say it is. We've got to tighten up some of that. So those are some of those. And I'm also, and this is the difficult part of not being able to knock on doors, is you don't get a real feeling from what the individuals want. And that's what I'm hoping to gain a little bit from tonight from you and these participants that are sitting listening to this. I want to hear from them on what they look forward to. Mental health is a big issue to us.
Hey, Paul,
it was
before you go to the next question, Paul, I have a question from Frank that applies to this last question you asked. So who's going to get the job of bringing Senator Keffer to heel for sponsoring, championing the open primary?
Who's going to put him to heel, did you say?
Yeah, you know, the question was to heel for sponsoring. You know, who's going to hold him accountable? I mean, or what are they going to do about him?
Well,
and his efforts to support.
That's an easy selection. The same thing that happened to me in 2016. I looked to the voters. I haven't seen anybody out asking for signatures on a ballot to put it before the voters at all. So I'm not sure how he's introducing it, if it's going to be a bill within the legislature itself, but to change it, it's going to have to go before the voters, I'd see, and that's really who will be most responsible for it.
Okay, go ahead, Paul.
And just so everybody kind of knows, Senator Keffer terms out this time, so it's not even like we're going to re-elect him, you know what I mean? But he will term out this his next election, which will be 2022, I believe, is when he's out.
Yeah, he has one more session, which will be the 2021.
Yeah, and one more question. It's kind of a thinking talk one. We have some time yet. By chance, if our governor decides to ask for a state income tax, or other tax increases to help offset the loss of tax revenue caused by the COVID-19 or coronavirus shutdown. It's like I shouldn't say it out loud because he's probably at home now going, "Jeeper, that's a good idea." But would you support it or not? And if not, what would be a couple ideas to make up for the lost revenue?
Well, first of all, I got to say there is no chance of an income tax being instituted on Nevada citizens. The protection is embedded in our state constitution. The protection is embedded. It will take several years to amend the constitution to allow for such an act. And as I said before, you can't tax what isn't there. And all businesses, small and large, have lost revenue. Nevada currently has the highest unemployment rate in the history of the state. The businesses will be fighting to survive and regain their position in the economy. Just as various local governments have, we, the state legislature, Ways and Means, must look at every state agency's operation and determine the return on the investment to their mission and the needs of the state. Performance-based budgeting was instituted in 2011, supposedly with accountability for the agencies. The legislature must clearly outline the policy objectives which are most highly valued and establish suitable metrics for determining the meeting of those goals. One of the first places I would question for reduction or elimination is the governor's recently enacted Office for New Americans. That right there is a $400,000 saving in each year of the biennium. This might also be a good time to install a tax and spending control amendment to our Constitution. This will ensure that the per capita cost of government does not increase any faster than the rate of the population adjoined or combined with inflation. The only true way to make up for loss of revenue is by cutting expenses, encouraging business to grow, and by reducing the red tape. And as I've said before, keeping Nevada pro-business climate alive and healthy. That's what we have to do. And that's what I would like to do, is make sure that we reduce the red tape, promote the businesses, allow them to regain their footing again, and make Nevada what it has been consistently, the place where people want to move to, where the businesses want to move to, where people want to start businesses. And that's how we go. We can't raise taxes. You can't tax what isn't there. And there is nothing there. Businesses have lost a quarter of their annual revenue by this shutdown, basically. And the state in turn. We may get some assistance from the federal government to the state. We have a $440 million rainy day fund. That'll be eaten up quickly. We've got to get back to businesses, allowing people to open up their businesses and get the economy going in a safe, proper, organized manner.
Thank you. Scott, is there any more? Is there any questions?
I got a couple of questions. So Thank you to those that are typing in on the chat. I'm just going to relay a couple of questions. What did PK do to promote free enterprise and small business when he was in the legislature? That came from Art.
One of the first things, one of my bills was the prevailing wage bill. I raised the prevailing wage. We ensured that the way that the prevailing wage was determined was for all the businesses, those union and non-union, will have fair and a level playing ground to contribute the information necessary to determine prevailing wage. That was one of the main bills there. It included a reduction in the cost of school buildings. And right off the bat, within months, I think it was 2 months of signing in by the governor, Carson City itself received some of those benefits. They were able to work on street repairs, get more done by that increased prevailing wage. Unfortunately, once again, I've got to say in the last session, the Democrats have come in without any factual information and reduced the prevailing wage bill, which is really upsetting because we all sat at a table together and negotiated that final bill out and agreed to it. That was, to me, in good faith bargaining. And within a couple of years, they renege on their handshakes, their agreements, and castrate the bill. There were several other bills that we had to do with on hairdressers, allowing them to expedite attaining their licensing, which I always remember because they were originally asking for 400 hours for a person to learn how to wash hair before they could be allowed to wash hair, earn money, and go on in their cosmetology. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing in the world. 400 hours to wash hair. As I said, you read the instructions. Wash, rinse, repeat. So we lowered that tremendously and allowed people to start working and then continue on if they in that program. At least they had income coming in. I got money for the colleges to open up some of their labor training programs. Excuse me. So actually we did, and I don't want to take credit because this was all a group exercise. Well, the 2015 was a very pro-business, very Republican legislature, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to keep the numbers there.
Another question from Maurice. It's typical that governmental agencies provide tax incentives either to large business or sports, franchises. What's your stance on providing those kind of tax incentives?
I don't like it, but it's an unfortunate fact of life that we have to do. And I compare it to you in high school. There's a young lady you may want to take to the prom. People are sending her, I don't know, tulips. You better send her roses to get her attention. You get a return on the investment, and that's the big thing to look at is if we give them tax incentives, what is the return on that investment? If we lose money immediately, but what will we gain on it on the flip side of employment, of businesses supplying in the case of the Raider Stadium, supplying the steel for it, the truckers supplying, bringing in the equipment, the steel workers, all those people are employed, they're working, and they're working and living in Las Vegas or wherever it may be. We've attracted other businesses that way. Excuse me. Before my session, Tesla wanted it. We brought Tesla in. Now you have the Tahoe Regional Industrial Complex out there going great guns. Just that it's completely bought out with various businesses that weren't here before that. So you've got to look at the return on investment. And as I said, it's an unfortunate fact that we have to do. Otherwise, we're going to lose some of those businesses. They'll go other place where people will be willing to give it to them.
Another question, can you address tort reform and how it can help our businesses?
Well, there's another bill that we passed in 2015 on tort reform dealing with the builders on their construction defect law. It was an abominable law that used to allow someone to have a minor defect in their home, almost take a class action suit for everybody in the neighborhood to not only sue the builder, but all his subcontractors that had no involvement connection to that. We passed it in 2015. The construction, particularly in Las Vegas for housing, took off again. And once again, in the last session, the legislature has gone in, the Democrats have gone in, because the numbers allow them to do it. have gone in and destroyed that protection for our construction people, and have brought back some of the ridiculous parts of it initially.
You have another question, Paul?
No, but there's a big long one on the chat. You see that?
I can read it.
Go ahead, read it.
All right. Candid O'Neill, in the 2008 recession, there was a flat cut of all budgets across the board without forethought. There were several agencies that get funding directly from the federal government or through a dedicated tax that must go to agencies. Those agencies had salary cuts, which returned money back to the federal government or other sources that didn't help the general fund. Will you not only advocate for a more focused look at how those cuts affect long-term, will you defend the state workers who still make far less than the private sector or other public agencies and haven't even been made whole from the previous recession? State workers took a 24 to 33% cut in pay and benefit increases during the recession. That's money that goes directly into our economy. So further cutting their salaries will also mean less money for local business and revenue for the state.
That's a long, multiple question. I apologize. Stay on my task with me, so hopefully I can answer all of the parts of it.
Okay.
It has a multifaceted answer.
Yeah.
In 2008, I was still a state employee, first of all. I was a division chief within the Department of Public Safety. And I had that same issue because most of the money that was generated in my division and came to my division, it was a $44 million budget, was federal money or was self-generated to support our operation, which had multiple units within there. The governor, and I shouldn't possibly speak for the governor and the legislature because I wasn't there. I was on as a state employee. Excuse me. I questioned that why do our employees, and they felt it just was an unjust to have this employee, a trooper who was funded by highway funds, be able to keep full salary where a secretary or someone in gaming control and law enforcement of gaming control enforcement had to take a reduction. So it was a balancing act across the board. I think I was told was that Fairness Act. So all state employees would do it. And jumping ahead to 2015, they finally got a raise back. I fought to keep. There was I call it the old age. A lot of people call it the dinosaur pay, but the longevity pay for state employees. That was zeroed out, and they were actually trying to get rid of the NRS for it. And on those last closing nights, I fought to keep it in there because it is much easier to have the bill, the statute, the law in there, even if it's unfunded, than to have to come and create the statute and get it funded. Because it's only fair. Right now, there's no incentive. The state employees lost several incentives. He or she, whoever the question was, by the 2008 recession. I suffered from it just right along with them. As to what may happen in the next session, they now have collective bargaining that will come to play. I'll be interested to see how that plays out for them. To say that I'm going to fully support, I want to hear there's pros and cons to collective bargaining, and I want to see how it plays out before I actually commit myself one way or the other. And what were some of the other parts of the question?
I think you got it. I think you got it. 3 or 4 other people have kind of chimed in on this, and you might just want to get it out of the way one final time. we've got 44 participants on the line, and when we started, I think we had 23 or 24. So some of the people that have joined us may have missed your initial comment. So the one question that people are kind of all saying, hey, I want to know the answer. So PK says he regrets voting for the commerce tax. Does this mean he will aggressively introduce legislation to repeal the commerce tax?
If that legislation is introduced and comes forward, I'll probably, yes. The trouble is, unfortunately, I haven't seen a whole lot of taxes removed from the state, not only in our state, but whether it's at any level, the county, Carson City, etc. I think it's an interesting argument or discussional point. As I said, after knowing what I know today and how it was handled by the Democrats, the way they attacked it and the way they rated it, as I said, I made the mistake in it, but I had to deal with the information I had at the time. So it's an evolving situation.
Okay, Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you, back to you. Maybe final comments.
As we finish up, I always find this interesting. The last election, I would always ask the candidates, give me 3 good reasons why I should vote for them. And it was pretty traumatic, some of them, to see struggle with the answers. You know what I mean? I thought, well, everybody knows this, but they should know why they want to run. So it interests me that they don't. But I did make it a note on my sheet that I sent him that, yes, I will be asking this. Please have 3 good reasons why I should vote for you. So, PK, what are 3 good reasons why I should vote for you?
You didn't say they had to be good reasons. You just said 3 reasons. So, excuse me. But anyways, and I appreciate it. And it is a tough question to answer. I particularly have the problem because, as I said earlier, everything that we do is a team effort. I do not like to always talk about I, myself, me, my, I. And unfortunately, in this case, I have to. So I apologize for using the I so much. But you've asked me for 3 reasons why you should consider voting for me. And here they are. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yesterday, because that was when I was serving in law enforcement, protecting our community, and learning the importance of serving the public with integrity, ability, and principles. That was when I was learning to deal with demanding situations and make difficult choices. These are necessary requirements for being an assemblyman. The today, because that is when we face the unique challenge of COVID-19, restarting our businesses, community, and letting people return to work in safety. Today is when we face the legislative challenge of reshaping our state government, when we need experienced legislation, leadership with a track record of working with others to gain principled solutions for our problems. Tomorrow, because that is the world we're going to leave for our children, grandchildren. The promise of tomorrow, the expectation of a better, brighter tomorrow can be ours to leave for them. My faith teaches me that with prayer and with an exceedingly amount of hard work, we can fulfill the promise of a better tomorrow. As I was asked to run by Al Kramer and other community leaders, I am now asking for your vote and the opportunity to serve you again as your assembly representative. I want to thank you, Scott, Paul, and the Carson City Republican Party for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.